In 1930s Australia, science was dominated by men. Few women studied science, fewer still managed to make a career out of science. But Elizabeth Carrington Pope defied the odds. Born in New Zealand on the 4th of November 1912, Elizabeth Carrington Pope went on to become a pioneering zoologist, and among many other achievements, was the first woman to be hired as a scientific assistant at the Australian Museum in Sydney. I'm historian and budding archivist, Dr. Gab Kemmis, and this is an episode of Speaking of History, a podcast which explores stories hidden within the recently digitised cassette tapes of interviews conducted in the 1970s, 1980s and 1990s with former University of Sydney staff and students. Today, we'll be listening to snippets of an interview conducted with Pope in 1976. In it, she reflects on her time as a student at the University of Sydney and the early part of her career as a zoologist.
I lived at a school, Scots College. My father was a housemaster there. So even when I went home from school, I was still in an academic atmosphere.
Yes.
And every night the boys did homework in prep, and so I did homework and prep, and I got very early into a pretty hard-working pattern. And I spent 3 years at Shirley School at Edgecliff, but left at 12 years old, having been just a normal, average sort of pupil. And I went to Skeggs Darlinghurst, and because I had done Latin, French and mathematics, I went up the A side of the school. The B side was science orientated, but the A side was the sort of classic education.
Elizabeth Carrington Pope was interviewed by Dr. Ursula Bygott, a member of the university's history unit, on the 2nd of March 1976 at her home in Linfield, just north of Sydney, New South Wales. As you'll hear, Pope serendipitously settled on studying zoology early in her life.
In the 4th year, I came to a choice. The chemistry course, as given at Skeggs, had finished, didn't go on to the leaving, and I had to choose between ancient history or zoology. Mm-hmm. And I was wanting to go to the university, and ancient history was then what we called a half subject. It only counted half towards an exhibition. And I had to get an exhibition in order to go to the university because the family couldn't afford it otherwise. So I took zoology, and it was extremely well taught.
Pope completed high school at Skeggs Darlinghurst and gained entry to the University of Sydney in 1932. Pope loved university. She was a dedicated student who relished learning new subjects, such as physics. She also played cricket for the university from her first year. Pope was a huge fan of cricket, and thanks to her father being a master at Scots College in Bellevue Hill, unlike a lot of girls her age, she'd been coached by cricketers and could bowl a handy leg break. She could also bat well. Studying zoology, however, was her focus as a student. She was awarded her Bachelor of Science degree with distinction in 1935, coming equal first in her year. As a reward, Pope was given a cash prize of £50. The money enabled her to continue to study at university for her 4th year and complete an honours project. To her great delight, Pope was soon awarded a Linnaean Macleay Fellowship. It was a lucrative fellowship worth £400 a year. At the time, the average wage was about £3 a week, so Pope, now on £8 a week, was earning very good money. And Pope certainly put the money to good use. She used it to support her research on several projects while working towards her Master of Science degree. This research was groundbreaking. She was one of the first to scientifically study the beaches in and around Sydney. Let's listen to her talk about her research during the fellowship.
So I did my MSc during the period when I held the Macleay Fellowship, and that MSc was done on the anatomy of the Port Jackson shark, and that was a sort of solid ongoing thing. And then I began working on the animal populations, the composition of them and the numbers of them at Longreef at Sydney, New South Wales. And this had been done at the suggestion of Prof Dakin, who wanted to know what was in the local fauna. And of course, Longreef was the wrong place to have picked for a student, because it was so varied and so prolific that it would take a lifetime to find out what was at Longreef. And I kept getting led down paths of new and interesting discoveries. It would have been much simpler if I'd picked a less complex area and done the basic population. I'd have probably got it done in a year and a bit, but I still went on for the rest of my life trying to find out exactly what the population was at Longreef.
Elizabeth's dream of travelling to the UK to complete a PhD was never realised. Yet another career path soon presented itself. She saw a job ad for a position as a scientific assistant at the Australian Museum. Pope was hesitant to go for the job. A university graduate had never been hired to work at the museum, and it was well known that museum staff felt that the university graduates were elitist and aloof. Yet Pope's mentor and friend, Professor W.J. Dakin, encouraged her to apply for the job.
I went to the Australian Museum. At that time, the staff in 1939, the Australian Museum staff had a graduate director, an arts graduate in the anthropology department, but there were no science graduates among the curators. And Dakin was very keen to establish the fact that in future curators should be science graduates. And he urged me to put in for the job when it was advertised in the museum. And I can remember him sort of briefing me before I went there and saying, "Now, Elizabeth, the whole staff is against graduates." And he said, "You have, I think, the ability to get on with people. I want you to make sure that you make friends of the staff as well as do the work that you're asked to do. Prove to them that a university graduate is not an aloof somebody or other with whom the ordinary man can have no dealings." He said that there should be graduates at the museum, and I think that you could make a success of the job and enjoy the contact with the people there and with the public. And this was one of the things that I had in mind when I first went there. And I can remember having to spend about a third of the first week proving to the staff that a university graduate could talk normal language, yes, take an interest in normal things. And I do think there that my interest in sport helped.
Yes.
Because they saw me at times going off to play cricket, or I used to play at a cricket school, go and practice at Griffey's cricket school under the glaciarium and have a bat on Thursday night, and they'd see me going off to this, and this made me more human in the eyes of the museum staff.
Pope was awarded the job as a scientific assistant. It's telling, I think, that she spends more time in the interview discussing Dakin's encouragement of her and her efforts to prepare for the interview and connect with museum staff, rather than focusing on celebrating being awarded the job and how much of an achievement it was. Pope was clearly a humble and committed scientist whose focus was creating and sharing knowledge about the marine environments in and around Sydney. Pope remained at the Australian Museum for the rest of her career, rising all the way to the position of Deputy Director and Curator. We've got much to thank Elizabeth Carrington Pope for. She dedicated her life to studying Sydney's beaches and communicating her findings with the public. She is also a great example of how far dedication and hard work can get you, even when faced with challenges. The sound quality of these tapes can vary, and we have done our best to make them as audible as possible. The Speaking of History podcast series is part of the History of University Life program. You can find out about our events by heading over to the History of University Life on Twitter handle @HULSeminar. The podcast is supported by the School of Humanities in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney, with technical production by Peter Adams. This podcast was recorded on Gadigal country, and we pay our respects to elders past and present.